Welcome to the Steven Cimino Says Boom Show, issue 60. Now, I know it seems like we've been away for a long time, but we had shows, we've had personal businesses. Niall survived, I think, a trip to the negative zone, a couple car crashes, all that stuff, but we're all good. Now, what is so big about today's episode, and why are we going live?
Well, we have to go live. And before we even get into it, everyone look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. But tonight we're going live because we got a great guest. All right, this will be his third time on the channel.
Yes,
and we spent a great time having a great interview with him. Unfortunately, the StreamYard download did not go through successfully, which was just very frustrating, John, with all the edits and all the graphics we had lined up. But so now we're going to make it a special event, a live event, and the big man's in the house who wasn't with us last time. So, we got the professor here probably with some great questions to blow our minds.
Yeah, just to be clarified, why there was a big gap in our production is because, as Niall was saying, we had this guest, but then we were going to put up an episode, and then it fell down, it bottomed out. Who knows what happened? Maybe Baron Zemo was behind it or something. And then it went down, so we didn't have something. And anyways, he's here today. So Steve, tell us, Big Steve's here. Tell us about our guest. What's going on with the guys coming up today?
Well, for all of you guys who are Spider-Man fans, and for those of you who are old enough to have gone through the 1980s, you could not escape this man's art, okay? Month in, month out, okay? Okay, you just saw his work, and it was just like a workhorse. Boom, 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 going all the time. And, now we are going to actually, see the face, hear the voice behind that name. And by the way, when I was in England, I couldn't ever say that name properly. It was always Alex Saviuk, Savakak, Siki, because in England, we don't have names like that. So I could never get the name. I was always like, where's he from? Again. So we are going to learn a lot today.
Oh yeah. I know the name was. I didn't know if he was Russian or if he was or maybe it was always, maybe he was from Hydra. I don't know. It was always that weird.
He's a Hydra agent.
I don't know.
But I'll tell you, one of the nicest guys ever, and I'm so happy to have come close with him, and I'm so happy that he's here because he needs to tell his story. We're sorry we lost his story, but he can tell it again. Now, why don't you bring out the big guy?
All right, everyone. Let's welcome Alex Saviuk back to the show.
Hello, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Alex, thank you for being here. And Alex, why don't you introduce the little guy next to you?
Oh, okay. This is my little buddy Snoop. Oh, look, he's getting camera shy now. He's hiding his face.
Let's put him on the spot. We're putting him on the spot.
Wow.
I don't know if you remember the last time we did this show, I was still in my other house, in my other studio, and this is my new studio. It's a lot bigger. I got a lot more things kind of spread out behind me. All my statue friends and my, the inanimate objects that never come to life to look over my shoulder and go, yeah, no, that line is off. You better change that right now or else the fans are going to hate you. But at any rate, it's a fun place to be, and I enjoy being here. So, but this is Snoopy. Snoop, take a look. Say hello.
Boom.
Here, wave. Okay, there you go.
Snoopy.
All right.
Well, yeah, I did notice the background is definitely different. So, Alex, once again, a nice introduction. Why don't you tell the people out there how you got into the business? Growing up, let's start right from the starting so people get to know your background in comics and like how you got into it. And prolific artist, drew forever.
Well, I'd have to say that without going all the way back to when I was a little kid, reading the Sunday papers that my dad would bring home and being introduced to full color comics at that time with the Phantom and Flash Gordon, Mandrake the Magician, Prince Valiant, and then, just some of the other wonderful artists in there like Leonard Starr doing on stage, Mary Perkins, which didn't necessarily interest me too much when I was a little kid, but I mean, it was still beautifully drawn. And you had Terry and the Pirates, you had Dondi, Dick Tracy, all those characters. And then we only had a small black and white TV when I was growing up in New York City as a little kid. And, Superman was on with George Reeves in gray and white, not black and white really, but gray and white. And I really kind of got into the whole, superpower thing, capes, flying, whatever. Then on the Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights, we had Zorro. I mean, no powers, but, he had a cape, he had a mask. I mean, how cool is it? The guy has a mask and a secret identity, And when you think about the secret identity of Zorro, and then you look at how Clark Kent was portrayed in the movies when, Christopher Reeve was trying to make this bumbling persona of Clark Kent, kind of hunched over, and then as Superman, he picks himself up and he looks really strong and powerful. So you kind of see that there are certain, things in comics are in a way derivative from one generation to the next. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I think Snoopy was just correcting me that maybe I said something erroneously, but I can't remember what it was. But at any rate, I fell in love with comics when my dad brought me home my first Superman comic, which was in 1958. And I saw him in glorious red, white, and red, yellow, and blue. And everything else was in color. And I said, wow, this is great. And I just kind of fell in love with the medium. And throughout my formative years there as a little kid, I didn't get that many comics from my parents. But my uncle, when he used to visit us every week, he knew that I liked comics, and he'd go to the store and pick up a couple of comics off the rack. But we were brought up, to be satisfied with what we got and not to say, hey, Uncle Vic, can you bring me some Superman comics next week? And, I saw an ad for a Batman comic. Maybe you could bring that guy over too, because he really looked kind of neat. Yeah. I mean, he would bring stuff over. I still remember I had issue number 2 of The Fly that was drawn by Jack Kirby. And here's it, I still remember that cover where he's kind of bent over and he's fighting this robot or whatever it was. And even though it wasn't Superman, it was a guy that had powers. I mean, he was this little scrawny kid when you think about it. And, everybody thinks, Peter Parker was the original scrawny kid that turned into a superhero. But Thomas Troy was one of the first scrawny guys that turned into a superhero. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't go way back to Captain Marvel. Was Billy Batson a kid, and then he turned into Captain Marvel in the 40s? Yeah. So that's not a new concept, okay? But it was new to me because I had never heard of it. But at any rate, I just grew up reading comics, drawing my own comics, writing and drawing my own books. And actually, when I was getting into college, I was an A student, and I wanted to be a doctor, surgeon when I grew up, and I still enjoyed drawing. And I always thought that drawing would be something I would do just on the side for fun. I had already been exposed to fanzines, and some of the guys that were in the fanzines, like Bernie Wrightson, Mike Kaluta, some of those guys, Bob Layton and Dave Cockrum and Don Newton, they all participated in fanzines just for the love of drawing comics. And so for me, it was, maybe that's what I'll do too. But then after 2.5 years of, I was already exposed to bio and chemistry in high school, but somehow in college, it was 10 times harder. And it was, for some reason or other, it just wasn't my cup of tea anymore after that time period. And I dropped out of school for a little while. Don't say dropped out of school. I took a sabbatical, and that's a better word. And but I was already playing in a band to help put me through school. And so for 1.5 years, I just was a disco/rock musician. Okay, I had taken 10 years of classical piano, so I was very familiar with keyboards and the simple structure of a song in those days. And so I was just basically a cover band playing 3-4 nights a week, putting my way through college. You know, as they say, wine, women, and song. I was surrounded by that all the time. You know, where some of my buddies were parking cars in parking lots on weekends to make a buck, I was on stage and getting free booze, and girls were in the front of me and girls were around me, and it couldn't have been better, right? But the guys that I was in the band with were relatively serious musicians. They wanted to go on and make records and things like that, write music, and I just realized after a short time of having fun, that was not my cup of tea. That's not what I wanted to do. And so at any rate, I ended up going, looking back into art and thinking, well, maybe I'll pursue my art career and see what happens. And I ended up at the School of Visual Arts in New York City back in the early 1970s. And my comic book teacher at that time was Will Eisner, creator of The Spirit.
Wow.
So I was in really good hands at that time. But fortunately and unfortunately for me, because I was one of the better students that already sort of knew what I was doing to a certain point, and not that I didn't need refinement, because that's not the case. That's exactly why I was there, because I was, as far as drawing, I was relatively self-taught. But, Will Eisner would spend most of the time with the students that really needed the help. And, but at one point, I guess after about a month or so, I said, Will, I could really use some, more guidance for what you've got, for what you want to teach me. And he says, hey, listen, if you've got time, we'll come to my office and we'll take a look at what you're doing more closely. And he did. He was very generous with his time with me, and went over, my work for a couple of hours. And then we ended up going to his gentleman's club in New York City, one of these posh places where I guess you have to wear a jacket. And so somebody in the back's going, hey, I see a Hawkman. Yeah, that's right. I was. I will go on a tangent briefly and say that Hawkman in the back was a 1/6 scale statue created by Icebreaker Studios. I think they're in Canada. And even though they're not Bowen or Kotobukiya or Sideshow, those guys do some wonderful work. And the wingspan on that thing, and that's why I didn't go for the 1/4 scale, because the wingspan on that was 42, and I didn't want it to take up half the wall. So still, it's a really cool piece.
I had a request for a zoom in, so that's why he said, Jay Dredd said, go big on Alex so we can check out some of the cool stuff behind it.
Well, if you want to do that again, I'll step out of the camera for a minute. If we can just,
Okay.
But at any rate, so no, Will was very helpful to me. I stayed at the School of Visual Arts for 2 years. And then every time I went to register, because I was a science student in college, only 20 of my 64 credits got transferred, because everything else was bio, math, chemistry, all that kind of stuff. And at the School of Visual Arts, they had nothing like that at all. They had English, language, those kinds of things. So those credits got transferred. And every time I went to register for a new course, I would say, no, I don't need that class. I'm a transfer student. Oh, and they believed me, and they let me take what I wanted to take. So between comic books and some painting as illustration courses, book illustration courses, things like that, I just kind of surrounded myself getting advice from, teachers that were published, that were still working in the business, whatever, book illustration, cover design, just, taking it all in from what they had to offer. And after 2 years, I just looked at the curriculum and said, wow, there's only a couple of more things here that I could take. I don't want to do repeat courses. So I basically just decided to, again, take a sabbatical and work on my portfolio. And I would say that was in June of 76. And through playing with music and stuff like that, through that, the rest of that year, and just creating stuff, I created my own fanzine, had my own character, etc. Put together a 20-page fanzine called Freedom. And sometimes I guess you might, look that up on eBay and maybe you'll be able to find one. But while we were moving to this new house, I just found a box with about, 200 copies left. So I may have to start circulating those things and saying, this is how I got in. But at any rate, using that fanzine, I went ahead and sent it out to various comic book shops. And at the time, the best thing I could have done was send a copy to Phil Suling, who I think was the godfather of modern day comic book conventions. And he called me up and said, "Hey, listen, this, I really like your book. Can you send me 500 copies?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I only had 250 left from the original 300. So I had to go back to print. And again, not having too much money to spend on printing and whatever, it was still a nice production, digest sized, basically 5 by, I'm going to say maybe 5 by 7, something like that. If you remember the size of the old TV Guide magazines, that's pretty much what size my fanzine was.
Yeah.
And I got the box from the printer, and I had to fold it and, collate everything, staple it, put it all together, because it saved me money to do it that way. And when I had that big box filled up again, I called Phil and said, "Hey, Phil, this is going to cost me an arm and a leg in shipping. Can I drive it to your house?" And he agreed. And he was only about maybe a half hour or 40 minutes away from where I lived. And when I got to his house in Coney Island, it was the first time I had seen a home that had 20-foot ceilings in the living room and a staircase on the back to get you to the second level. But lining all his walls were framed pieces of original artwork from all the heroes that he had grown up with. And there was a Prince Valiant page on the wall, a Spirit page, a Joe Kubert Hawkman page, Gil Kane stuff, Carmine Infantino, all the guys that were my heroes growing up. Throw in Wayne Boring and Kurt Swan and Mike Sikowski and all those guys. All that stuff was on the walls. And probably, if I'm not, not that I can recall, but I wouldn't doubt if there was a, like a Mac Raboy, Captain Marvel Jr., or a Dan Barry, Flash Gordon, or even a Cy Barry Phantom framed on that wall. It seemed like it was congested enough where I didn't want to just stand there and stare and ogle at all this stuff. I was there to do business with the man. And so at any rate, we squared up, and then a couple of weeks later, he had a convention in New York City. And this is in May of 1977. And when I attended the show on that one, I think it was Saturday, by myself, just to kind of look around and, maybe get introduced to some people, do some networking. I went by his table, saw that my book was there. We chatted a little bit about it, and I went on my merry way. And about a half an hour later, I was paged to come back to his table. And there was a gentleman standing there, probably as old as I am now. At the time, I was 24. And now I'm a lot further than that. Yeah. I'm going to reveal this to the general public. In 2 days, I will be 71 years old. Oh. It's just a number, because in my mind, I'm still like 21 or 25 years old. Okay. Yeah. But the rest of my body, which I'm not showing you right now, it's because I'm stuck in a chair like Captain Pike. And no, I'm only kidding. But thankfully, it's not that bad. But I'll tell you something. When you wake up in the morning and you take that first step out of bed and you sit at the edge of the bed and you go, "Oh, wow, it's going to be a tough day." And then you sort of amble like a slow turtle to the bathroom and you go, "Oh man, I'm telling you." And then somehow you scare yourself into, to open your eyes by seeing yourself in the mirror, and you realize, "Wow, that's me, man. It's going to be tough." As Rodney Dangerfield said, "Yeah, look in the mirror, and man, I'm going to be drinking early." I don't drink, but I'm just saying.
Well, hey, happy early birthday to you, Alex.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. But at any rate, so anyway, this gentleman's looking through my stuff, my fanzine, so to speak, and with a smile on his face. And there I was getting introduced to Sal Harrison, the then president of DC Comics. Wow. And he was looking through my magazine, asked me if I was working. I said, no. And he said, "How would you like to work for us at DC Comics?" And that's pretty much how it began. Wow. Made an appointment to see Vince Colletta, the art director, that following Wednesday. And he looked at my work, said it was good, and he sent me in to see Paul Levitz, and I left with my first job, which was a one-page mystery or horror type story. And from there, I must have just kept, when I would turn that stuff in, I would get subsequently a 7-page sci-fi story that was inked by Bob Layton. That's the first time we met. After that, I did a 5-page war story. Some of that was inked by Frank Giacoia and another gentleman named Duffy Voland, both who have since passed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then after that, I believe I did a 2-page witching hour story, which surprisingly enough, I still have the artwork for that. And I look at it and I go, wow, it wasn't credited, but it was inked by Pat Broderick.
Wow.
Anyway, when I was bringing that story into Murray Boltinoff, I had tried something different with the layouts because I know Neil Adams was, he was pretty radical in the way he introduced, new dynamics to the art field with his figure drawing, with his layouts. And so I tried to make this 2-page, relatively boring story a little more exciting by altering the size of the panels, having people jut into the panel above or the panel next to it. But as long as it read well, that was the key. That was the key element. The one thing I learned from Will Eisner was that the story comes first, and designing. You design a panel, you don't necessarily design a page. Although I have to say I was at fault here because I was trying to design this page to make it look more interesting. But at any rate, the bottom line is that Murray Boltinoff hated it. He goes, "Oh my God, I don't know what's going on here. I can't follow." I said, "Murray, if you read the balloons, they follow suit." He goes, "No, this. I got to go see Vince Colletta." So he says, "Step out of my office." So and wait here. So I was standing outside the door, and I'm thinking, "Wow, my career is over before it even began." So he goes into Vinny Coletta's office about maybe 30 feet or whatever down the hallway. The door closes, and then you just hear all these muffled voices going back and forth behind the door. And I'm thinking, oh boy, he's letting him have it. Okay, well, that's it for me. But anyway, Murray comes storming out of the office, walks right past me, slams the door. Vinny Colletta sticks his face out of his office and says, "Hey, kid, come on in." So I walk in, and he goes, I said, "Wow, hey, look, I'm really sorry. I mean, Murray was all," he goes, "Don't worry about it. It looked great. How would you like to draw a Green Lantern?" And so I said, "Oh, wow. Yeah, sure. Like, what happened to Mike Grell?" "Don't worry about Mike Grell. He's busy doing something else. Do you want to draw a Green Lantern?" I said, "Sure. Come on, I'll introduce you to Julie Schwartz, who was the then editor of Green Lantern, The Flash, I guess Justice League of America, Hawkman, The Atom." I mean, he had a whole slew of those books. And so at any rate, I walked in, got introduced, and he looks at me and he says, "So what makes you think you can draw a Green Lantern?" And Vinny goes, "Well, this is the kid I was telling you about. He's better than Gil Kane." And I said, no, please. Don't put that on me. That's way too much pressure. I said, "But I'm a big fan of Gil Kane's, and I've admired his work over the years." And, so he says, so Julie says, "Well, draw up some samples of, Green Lantern in your style so I will see how it look." I said, "Okay, sure." So I came back a couple of days later. I handed him the pages. He says, "Well, go in the bullpen, have a cup of coffee, and I'll call you in after I'm done." And about maybe 10 minutes later, some intern sticks his head into the bullpen and says, "Hey, Julie Schwartz wants to see you." So I walk in and he goes, "Okay, so now here's a story by Denny O'Neil. And it includes," and I'm thinking, oh, wow. So this is it. So I didn't even have to, I was tempted to say, "So I guess you like my samples," but I didn't have to because he was handing me a story.
Wow.
Written by Denny O'Neil, one of my heroes. And the one refreshing thing about looking at this story was that when I was doing those short stories, whether it was a 2-pager, a 7-pager, a 5-pager, gosh, when you give a writer in those days, I guess, or maybe at any particular point, writers want to write. So when you tell them, "Oh, listen, I would like you to write me a sci-fi story," and the writer goes, "That's great. How many pages do I have?" And the editor says, "You got 7." And he goes, "Oh, man, but I was hoping for 10. Nope, you got 7. So of course, then they take 10 or 12 pages of ideas, cram them into 7 pages, give you these monster art directions with tons of dialogue and captions, so much so that, hey, this was really my baptism of fire, that 7-page story, because it was just so crowded with art directions. You know, panel 1, this is happening, all kinds of balloons. Panel 2, horizontal panel. And I'm going, okay, so panel 2 is a horizontal panel. So what does that make panel 1? Oh, I guess that's like if I was doing a 9-panel grid, panel 1 would be kind of narrow, so I could make panel 2 wider. And I remember the art direction. In the foreground, you know, the chief was admonishing, you know, the young warrior. And in the middle ground, everybody was fighting. And in the background, the spaceship was landing. And I'm thinking, wow. And there's balloons and captions. And I'm thinking, how do I draw this? When I was writing and drawing my own stuff, well, that's it. You write and draw your own stuff. So you draw as large as you want, whatever it is you want. Now I'm restricted to drawing what the writer gives me to draw. And I'm thinking, well, there's no way in heck this guy thinks visually, because he wants all this stuff. And I'm thinking, wow, tiny little figures and the, you know, going all the way to the back. And yeah, you can tell a story with tiny figures, but who's in the mood? Who wants to do that? You know, in panel 2, and there's 8 panels on this page. But at any rate, I did get through it. But going then back to when I got Denny O'Neill's story, Denny O'Neill's, you know, was very succinct with his dialogue, art directions, gave you maybe at least 5 panels a page to draw, and had plenty of room, plenty of elbow room to work. And there was a half-page panel here and a large panel there and 4 panels on this page. And it was just such a pleasure to be able to kind of get past my nerves that I'm drawing Green Lantern, and to be able to kind of just be able to show what I could do, you know, with this story. And so after I turned it in, I got a raise, and then I got another fill-in to do, and then another 2 fill-ins to do. And then there was this thing that happened at DC back in the late 70s called the DC implosion. I'm sure you've probably heard about that. But at any rate, the sales in DC in general were not good. And so they were cutting back, canceling titles like crazy. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this doesn't sound good. And then I remember getting a phone call from Jack C. Harris, a writer and friend of mine now, who was the editor of Green Lantern at the time, among other books, but that was his baby. Was so happy to get that book to work on. And he calls me up and he's telling me all about this implosion and how they, you know, they're keeping veterans, but they're firing the new guys. And I'm thinking, oh, that's it. There's the clue right there. The new guys. I'm toast. And then he says, however, of all the new guys that we let go, you're the one that we're keeping, and you're going to be the regular guy on Green Lantern. And I said, wow, thank you so much. So I was very pleased, obviously, honored that they thought that highly enough of my work that I would, you know, could stay on and do that book. And then within a couple of months after that, Paul Levitz came to me and said, hey, listen, we'd like you to draw the Flash. And I said, oh, instead of Green Lantern? No, along with Green Lantern. You'll be working with editor Ross Andru. We think that would be a great job for you. And Ross Andru was one of my heroes also growing up. And, you know, way back from when he was doing, you know, Metal Men and Star Spangled War stories with all the dinosaurs and stuff. Yeah. And I wasn't necessarily a big Wonder Woman fan, although if there was nothing else around, I would read a Wonder Woman comic. But I always enjoyed Ross's art. And then when he, prior to him becoming an editor at DC, he was drawing Spider-Man over at Marvel. And so then when he came to DC, he was editor. And he was also editor in charge of cover layouts. So he would do cover sketches for just about everybody. And, you know, he welcomed me to come in and work on The Flash. And I only stayed there for 7 issues because Marcus Killigrew loved Ross Andru. Yeah, you got that right. Unfortunately, Ross passed away way too early. I think he was, well, like I said, I'll be 71 in a couple of days, and Ross was only in his 60s. Unfortunately, his health failed him. But and at this particular point, if he was around, he'd probably be either late 80s or early 90s. And as you know, if you look back at, some of the heroes that I had growing up, I mean, a lot of those guys did get into their late 80s and early 90s before they passed on. Guys like, George Tuska, Nick Carty. I'm trying to think who else. Well, at any rate, those two automatically come to mind. You
were just going through like such a who's who. Like, just those names of legends. Like, I mean, like your whole step ladder going, like working through. I mean, just a name here, a name here. I mean, started with Will Eisner. I mean, that had to be huge. I mean, but there's something you said, Alex, that I like, that I never thought of it before, but how impactful it probably was. You're watching Superman in gray and white, and then all of a sudden you see him in color. That had to be like crazy, like, because for a little kid, like, oh my God, he's blue, he's red, that had to be. I never thought about that before. A kid from
it was kind of mind blowing, because already at that age I was 6, and I loved coloring books. Okay, I would always, you get a coloring book, and at the time all we could afford was that Crayola box of crayons with 8 colors in it. But all the primaries were in there, along with brown and black, and purple, green. So you had your primaries, your secondaries. And wow, so when you see red, yellow, and blue, and with all the coloring that I would do in whatever coloring book I got, I think one of the first things I did was sort of draw my own rendition of Superman to the best of my ability. And, didn't have a flesh tone, but I did a very, very light brown in his face, and it was blue and red. And I'll tell you something, I was just, magnetized. I was magnetized by that S. For some reason or other, I loved that S. And when, in the comic book, when, Clark Kent would rip open that shirt and reveal the S, that was just so mind-boggling to me that even as a little kid, I would take a piece of loose leaf paper that was ruled, okay, with the light blue lines, but I would draw a red and yellow S on it, and I would get Scotch tape from my mom, and I would have a T-shirt on, and I would tape it to my T-shirt, and then put like a regular cotton shirt on over it and stand in front of them. And I had a doctor kit already as a little kid, and in the doctor kit there were these like glasses. They didn't have sidebars, but I could fit them on my nose. So I would stand in front of the mirror with these plastic glasses on, and I'd go like this and open up my shirt and go, "This is a job for Superman." And boy, I had a towel in my T-shirt behind my in my shirt, and I'm kind of looking to the side going, I don't know. It never looks baggy in the comics, but maybe because he's bigger and it kind of fits better. But you don't know what the material is made out of in comics. That's the same thing with Captain America's shield. How the heck does that fit on his back when he was in the army? And then when he would take his uniform off, that shield would be there looking kind of.
Don't ask those questions, Alex. We don't ask those questions.
No, of course not, because it's comics. We don't ask stuff like that.
We don't ask those questions.
I mean, Batman used to have that utility belt with the little yellow test tubes, and he would pull all kinds of stuff out of there, right? And now, at least to my knowledge, Batman has a utility belt that's got packets, right?
Yeah, the packets. Yeah.
Sort of like 4-inch by 5-inch by 2 to 3-inch packets around, so he can physically go in there and pull out some giant whatever the heck, because, with that utility belt. But we didn't ask those questions.
Shock repellent.
Yeah, shock repellent.
Get him, Steve. Go ahead, Steve. Get him.
Yeah.
By the way, Alex, there's one thing that you mentioned and you skipped over, and I don't think you realize the power and gravitas of what you said. So I want to remind you.
Okay.
You talked about being young, being in a band, and having all these women around. Well, this is the comic world. We haven't even met the women yet. So, you know, first things first, as soon as I heard that, I was like, wow, okay, that's not the regular comic person at all. And secondly, the fact that you could draw and play music at the same time, that's not fair. That's not fair to the rest of us. Okay. It's truly amazing. But there's another part here that's sort of missing that I want you to flesh out if possible. Now, you had gone to school and you were learning all this, you know, hardcore stuff. Now, obviously, your parents had a vision for you and you kept going on these sabbaticals. What was their reaction to you just saying, okay, I'm going to go take a break right now and, you know, I'm going to draw some funny pictures or I'm going to go and play music? Because my parents would have got a crowbar out and just rammed it down my throat.
No, actually, to be honest with you, I was very, very, very lucky to have the parents that I had. Okay. They were always, hey, listen, if you want to become an artist, you know, become an artist, become the best artist you can be. You want to be a doctor? My dad said, look, I'll work as hard as I can to get you into medical school. Okay. When it came down to taking those particular sabbaticals, they said, well, you know, if this is what you need to do, then, you know, we support you. But, you know, you got to come up with a career choice at some point and decide what you want to do. If you want to become a musician, well, then you got to really concentrate on it and do that. But if you don't want to do that, then you got to find, you know, pick something that you really like and go for it. So my parents were very, very patient with me. My brother was the one who, you know, didn't have, you know, he took violin lessons when he was a kid, but he hated it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So he just kind of did it to please my parents. And then after a while, they realized how much he hated it. So they said, well, if you really don't like it, then you can stop. So he stopped. But his idea was always to go into the medical field. And even though he didn't succeed in getting into medical school here in the United States, he could have gone to, I think, Guatemala. And but he didn't want to learn Spanish. He didn't want to go to a third world country to become a doctor. Then have to, you know, do your medicine studies over there in another language, come over here, have to retake the boards and intern all over again. He just didn't see that as being part of what he wanted to do. So he ended up becoming a biology teacher. And it seemed that while we were living on Long Island, he was teaching a lot of the chiropractic students at this one university. I think it was CW Post out in Long Island. And after a while, he says, wow, you know, I'm teaching these kids to become to help them in their studies along the way to become chiropractors. Maybe I'll become a chiropractor myself. And that's what he ended up doing. So he was a chiropractor in Long Island. And then, but the competition was extremely fierce. And then he ended up selling his business, coming down to Florida, where I was living already, followed me by about a year or two. And one of his best buddies that he was, as a matter of fact, I think when he was teaching at the university, his assistant ended up becoming the chair of the biology department at one of the universities here in Daytona Beach. And so when my brother came down, he became a professor of biology here. And so he was still around the sciences, but he gave up, you know, becoming a doctor, chiropractor, whatever.
So he's a doctor and you were a comic artist. So Alex, how did you transition to Marvel? How did that happen?
Well, left out one little step in my secondary years when I was going through high school. I lived in the town next door to the Romita family. Wow. And Victor Romita was the older brother, a year younger than me. And John Jr. was 4 years younger than I am to the date. We share the same birthday. We're 4 years apart, but he looks like I could be his father. Okay, I mean, you know. John works out 7 days a week. I'm not talking about the color of his hair. That's none of my business, okay? But I'm going to be 71. And John Jr., hey, listen, I'm sorry. I'm going to reveal that you're going to be 67. So, that being said, John still looks great. And I envy the fact that he looks great and probably feels 100 times better than I do. But at any rate, aside from that, John Jr. is a great guy. I don't know if you ever interviewed him, had him on your show.
Oh, yeah, he's been on.
Yeah, he's a fabulous guy. But at any rate, I knew the Ramitas, and when I got into that high school, some of my buddies were saying, "Hey, because they knew I drew, John Romita's son is, goes to this school, and he and I were in the same honor society together, and they said, his father draws Spider-Man." I said, "Yeah, that's what I've been told." He goes, "You want us to introduce you to him so maybe you can meet his dad?" I go, "Nah, I wasn't that aggressive to go, yeah, I got to do this, I got to do that." Eventually, maybe weeks after that, somehow in some way after I had befriended him, he said, "Hey, listen, my dad draws Spider-Man." I said, "Yeah, I know." He goes, "Would you like to meet him?" And I said, "Well, sure." So he set up the appointment. And just to show you how time is relative, at the time I was 17 and John Romita Sr. was 39. I met him when he was 39. On his drawing table was a page from Fantastic Four number 103, the issue after when he was
looking at that today.
Okay,
with the Submariner.
Yeah, and
And
he was telling me when Stan Lee said to him, "Listen, I need you to draw the Fantastic Four." He said, "Man, I was so nervous because I was following Jack King Kirby, and Stan said, 'Don't worry, John, you got this. I know you do.'" But at any rate, so he just said that, Stan gave him a lot of encouragement, gave him ideas and stuff to make everything work. And next to that page was a page of pencils by Gil Kane for The Amazing Spider-Man, which John Romita was inking. So I got to see Gil Kane pencils for the first time.
Spider-Man never looked better. Never looked better. I can't believe.
Although I remember because looking at it and you see all the construction lines and it's that Gil Kane stuff going on. And however, the fingers looked like little bananas, And I said to John, I go, "Wow, he didn't really draw those fingers too well." He goes, "Yeah, well, he knows that I can draw and fix it like at the drop of a hat." So he just kind of glorified breakdowns, if you will. Okay. And so John would go in there and do his thing. As a matter of fact, the page that was of the Fantastic Four 103 that was on his drawing table was the one which was a 3-panel page. The top panel, the half-page splash, was Reed and the FF standing around the big monitor, and President Nixon was on the screen.
Yeah.
And he laid out his pages in blue pencil, and then there was graphite over it. And I said, "Why does it look blue?" And so he's explaining to me the whole thing about using non-photo blue pencils for layout, so he wouldn't have to erase and he can just draw right on top of it, etc. And I ended up finding out what blue pencils he used, and to this day, I do all my layouts in blue pencil.
Oh, God. So, Alex, I just got to tell you, I'm writing an article for Roy, and we're doing a special, for Alter Ego. He's doing an all Romita special. And let's just say I'm doing some of John's greatest comics, in my opinion. And I'm telling you, Fantastic Four 102 and 103 is in that list. And what you're saying is just crazy, because I was writing about that today when you're saying that. So the fact that you got to see that, I was just looking at it and I was saying, because Verborten did the inks on that.
Right.
And I was like, God, that looks so good. You knew. You want to know something funny? He always had to take over from the superstar. From Ditko, Stan threw him right on Spider-Man. From Jack Kirby, he threw him. And you want to know something funny, I think? When Romita started, the sales started going up. From Kirby, the sales even went up. And you look at those issues. And I'm like, God, you're so good. He drew the sub.
And he only drew 4 issues. He did 3 with John Verborten, and 106 was inked by Joe Sinnott finally. And now it looked to me more like the Fantastic Four because Joe was on it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And look at this. That was a 3-part story. I just found this all out today. Jack Kirby did that 102, and that's why Stan had Romita do the cover of 102, and then think of the pressure he was under. No wonder oh my God, you got to go in the middle of the story. You're taking over from Jack Kirby. Get to work, and he just
Right.
Well, John,
hit it out of the ballpark.
according to legend, and I don't know whether Alex has heard this either. Maybe he has, but in an interview, John Romita Sr., when he got first called into the office and heard that Jack wasn't doing the book, he said, "Oh, so you're going to cancel the book then?"
Yeah.
And Stan's like, "No, you're doing it."
Yes, you're doing it.
And then you can imagine how his heart's, the butterflies in his belly, when you think about his skill level, it's like, John, you don't have, you've got this handled. But in his own mind, he would always psych himself out. When I spoke with him, he was very self-effacing.
Yeah, he was a perfectionist. He was a perfectionist. And I recall he told me a story once where it was a Monday. He was in the studio or his office. I don't think he had a cubicle at this point, but he's had an office already. And he was working on a page from a plot. And he just couldn't seem to get that first panel down, and he's drawing something. He doesn't like it. He rolls up the paper. The wastebasket was overflowing. Pieces of rolled up paper were on the floor. And all of a sudden, John Buscema walks by, sticks his head in the office, and he says, "Hey, Johnny, what are you doing?" He says, "Oh, man." He says, "I can't get started on this page." And he goes, "Hey, look, let me tell you something. It's a 20-page story, okay? Not every panel is going to be a Picasso, okay? Time is money. You're wasting time. Get with it. Move it along. Draw that panel and move on to the next one." He says, "You can't waste time like this. It's like you're killing yourself." And because of that, John Romita said to me a long time ago also, he said, "I can draw as fast as Jack Kirby and as fast as John Buscema, but I cannot tell a story as quickly as they can." He says, "I got to mull it over in my head, get all these points down." He goes, "So I struggle to draw 1 page a day of story, whereas Jack sees it in his head and John B sees it in his head, and they can just whip out 3 pages a day religiously." Okay. I remember this one story that he told me about Jack Kirby. He said, we'd go into the bullpen on whatever day in the morning, and there's Jack Kirby sits down at his cubicle, and within maybe 15, 20 minutes, the cubicle is filled with smoke. And there's this smokiness around his cubicle, and there's this shadowy figure in there, and you could see the arm moving, okay? And then 2.5, 3 hours later, Jack exits the cubicle, the smoke trail follows him, and there on the board are 2 complete pages of full pencils. Okay, and everybody's looking, going, "Oh my God, Jack drew 2 pages of full pencils in like 3 hours." And then Jack would take a 2-hour lunch, come back 2.5 hours, and then there'd be like maybe 2 hours left in the day, and the cubicle would fill up with smoke again. And and then he's obviously doing his magic, and then when he leaves and the smoke vanishes, there's another page of full pencils. So he did 3 pages of pencils in basically like 6 hours in the office. And that's why when you think about it, Stan would call on Jack in those days to draw just about every cover other than Spider-Man. And
that happened to John after. John took the reins from Kirby because Stan had him come in there, and then he had to be doing all that stuff. That's why during the 70s, he was doing all those covers, the re-inking of the stuff, and it was just... And you want to know one other thing about John? Another comic I just didn't see in so long. I was going through, the first full appearance of Mary Jane, and those panels of, I didn't realize how good they were. I knew they were good, and I knew they were legendary, but I just didn't get into my eye. I haven't seen it. And then you look at how Ditko drew in Spider-Man 25, like Mary Jane. She was kind of behind the thing, and she looked like a 50s girl. Right. And then Romita's Mary Jane. And you see Peter Parker like, he's been blowing it off for months. And then Aunt May takes him to Emma Watson, and you see, and you knew. you knew why Stan had that, he just knew where Ditko left off. I don't know if you know this too, but when Romita started Spider-Man, sales went up. They it started to explode. And he became the number one selling comic for Marvel.
But John, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense, John. When you look at that panel again, and Alex will let you know right now, if that woman is coming in, and that little bookworm idiot little Peter Parker standing there,
he's struggling to hold his smile,
and it's like, what do you mean she's single? There'd be 9 million jocks, all sorts of guys going, hey man, married, and she turns up and she's like, I've only got ice for you. As soon as I saw that, I had to stop reading Spider-Man.
But Steve, not just Romita, but then even with Stan's dialogue, "Face it, Tiger, you hit the jackpot." That became, the synergy was right back there. And it made me think of like Stan, like how he probably, he had that thing with Romita, and you could see their synergy was going, because obviously he was losing it with Ditko. They were having their problems, but that synergy, and like, it's just such a perfect panel with such perfect dialogue, and both of them are iconic. I mean, that's crazy. That phrase and that picture is legendary.
And you know what? It's funny we're talking about this, because one of my first Spider-Man stories that I worked on was filling in on Spider-Man number 292, where on the last page Peter proposes to Mary Jane and she says yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's a big moment for me there. And then I did, in 1989, I did my first and only graphic novel called Parallel Lives.
Yes.
And I had a full page shot in there where Mary Jane's in the doorway with Pete like going gaga, and she says, "Face it, Tiger, you hit the jackpot." So I got to draw my version of it, although John Romita was heavily in my mind. I mean, it's one of my heroes. I mean, to this day, people say, wow, your Peter and Mary Jane still remind me so much of John Romita. And
did you ever, because you drew Spider-Man forever too, but did you ever talk to Johnny about your Spider-Man, because you were that kid who was watching him, and now you're drawing Spider-Man, like you were drawing a Web of Spider-Man, you were drawing that thing like crazy. Did you ever talk to him about that or show him? Did he know it was you?
Oh yeah, no. Well, the thing is that when it came to Spider-Man, when I first got to working on Amazing for 3 issues, fill-ins, and then I was starting to do Web of Spider-Man. He was art director at this point already. Okay. This is 1987, and I remember I got to do a cover for the Web of Spider-Man annual. I think it was number 4, and Jim Salicrup says, he goes, "Hey, listen, I'm going to see if John Romita wants to ink this." I said, "Really?" And sure. He goes in, he comes back, he goes, "Yeah, John said he'll ink this." And so I said, wow, that's so great. So that was the first time that we ever really got to work together as penciler inker. And subsequently, we did 3 more covers together. One was for Web of Spider-Man number 43, which is relatively iconic because Mary Jane is, a model on it, and Jim Salicrup's the photographer taking a picture of her. And
like some weird cult story.
Yes, The Cult of Love by Peter David, a 4-issue. Yes, here it is. Matt Bird says, but here, and let me just one interesting thing about that cover. If you see that cover, you see Mary Jane from behind, and she's got just a very simple type of a piece of lingerie, and you see the strap, and you get to see a little bit of her bosom from like a 3/4 piece of an angle, right? Well, at the time that story was being written, Peter David had written it that this model friend of Mary Jane's was posing for Playboy, and she was convincing her that Mary Jane was Playboy material. So on that cover, the blurb originally read, "While Peter is off, fighting the Cult of Love, Mary Jane is posing for 3 dots, Playboy, question mark, question mark, question mark." And she was nude from behind as I penciled it. And she was nude as John Romita got to ink that cover and did such a lovely job. But the thing is that a week later, Jim Salicrup called me up and said, listen, when Tom DeFalco saw that cover with the cover copy, he says, what? He says, the parents are going to be in such an uproar. They're not going to let this pass. We can't be promoting Playboy on the cover of a Spider-Man comic at Marvel. You got to change this. So Jim says, he goes, well, we have to put lingerie on Mary Jane. I said, oh, well, do you want me to come in and take care of it? He goes, no. John's going to do it. I said, oh, okay, sure. So the printed version has John, inked by John with the lingerie piece and the strap and everything. However, I happened to be in the office when that first cover was inked with her nude back and that blurb, and I got Xeroxes of that cover.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of cool because I've posted that on Facebook. I've posted the printed cover, and I got people saying, so where's that cover with her in the nude? I said, that's the one that got printed. But in printed, she's got clothes on. I said, yeah, but this is the original. Then John Romita fixed it and just turned it into the new one. Yeah, but where's the old one? Thinking, God, get a life, guy. I mean, you can't explain this any further anymore, right?
Yeah.
But at any rate, I still have the Xerox of that as evidence of my story here. Wow. And just to go back a little further, back in 1980, I was only working for DC Comics for 3 years. But living in New York and getting the New York Times every Sunday, I used to look in the advertising section for storyboard jobs because actually prior to me starting in comic books, a month or so before that, I started doing storyboards for advertising. And even though they paid 10 times as much as comics, comics was comics. I got into comics and occasionally I'd get an advertising job. So I'd always looked in the ads on Sunday. And I remember this, got a couple of gigs that way. And one time there was an ad from comic book publisher looking for artists to do special project comics. Please send samples to P.O. Box, yeah, et cetera, et cetera. It was a very short ad. I'm going, gee, what the heck, special project comics? I knew that having already worked at DC for 3 years, they had me do some special project comics type stuff where they pay double and triple rate. So you never wanted to turn that down. Even if it was one page, whatever you were making, you were going to get paid twice or 3 times as much. So I answered the ad, and about a week later, I get a phone call from John Romita. He goes, Alex, hey, how you doing? I said, hey, John, what's going on? He goes, is DC not giving you any work? I said, yeah, why? He goes, well, you answered my ad. So I said, well, John, you put an ad in the New York Times. I get the Times every week. I'm looking for storyboard gigs and some extra stuff here that pays more money. He goes, well, he says, if you've got the time, I'd love to have you work on this. It's a special project comic. It's 32 pages long, though. It was written by Marv Wolfman, and it's going to be a free giveaway if you buy a tube of AIM toothpaste.
Huh.
I said, oh, okay. And he says, and it pays like 2.5 times normal, whatever rate you get. And so when I told him what the rate was that I was getting at DC, he goes, oh yeah, you're going to make a lot more than that. Don't worry about it. And I couldn't pass that down. So I'm thinking, well, I wasn't on the contract at DC, although they were keeping me busy per se. However, by 1980, I had stopped working on The Flash. I had stopped working on Green Lantern because doing 2 books a month was way too much for me. And they took Green Lantern away, gave it to Joe Staton, and kept me on The Flash so I could keep working with Ross Andru. Excuse me. At the same time, I had an agent that was getting me storyboard work, and he had called me up and said, hey, listen, there's a movie coming out, okay, and we want you to do this movie poster, and the poster is supposed to be done in a comic book style, even though it's live action. I said, really? And it featured Mickey Rooney in his last role, at the introduction of a British actress named Emma Sams, and the movie was called Arabian Adventure, okay? And so I ended up doing all the artwork for this, the color, painted it in Dr. Martin's dyes, the whole bit. Paid an awful lot of money at the time in 1978. And then there was some other jobs coming along. And so I actually went into Joe Orlando's office at the time and I said, Joe, I can't draw the Flash anymore. He goes, how come? He says, we were just about to give you a raise. We really liked what you were doing. I said, because I'm doing these advertising jobs that pay so much more money. They seem to be coming in more frequently, and I really don't want to turn that down. He goes, well, I understand, but hey, listen, it was good working with you, and if you ever want to come back, the door's open. I said, okay, I appreciate that. So oddly enough, after that happens, and I gave up my Flash gig, I think I had maybe 1 or 2 small jobs in advertising over the next month, and I said, wow, this really stinks. I'm going to have to go back to comics. So I went back, and of course, the Flash was already in Don Heck's hands by that time. And they sent me to Julie Schwartz, and I was working on Superman Family, doing Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane and Superboy, and eventually working on Superman books. But that's pretty much how I got off the Flash. But going back to 1980, I answered this ad, and so while I was working at DC at that time, I wasn't doing any major books. I think I was working on Robin and Jimmy Olsen. So I figured, hey, I'm going to do this Spider-Man book. That's really cool. And so I got to do that. It was inked by Mike Esposito, who was, a big inker on John Sr. back in the day. And I remember going into the office and seeing page 3, a horizontal panel close-up of Green Goblin. And I said, I'm looking at it, and he was cross-eyed. And it really bothered me. And I said, wow, I got to go into John's office. And I knocked, and I said, excuse me, John, can I just show you something? He said, sure. I said, I got the Xeroxes of my pencils, and I didn't draw him cross-eyed. He goes, oh, yeah, don't worry. I'll take care of it. I said, oh, thanks. Appreciate it. So at any rate, that was the first time John Romita did some inking on me, was he fixed the eyeball on the Green Goblin. But at any rate, after that job, I ended up doing a special project poster of the origin of Spider-Man, which was also some sort of a giveaway if you bought a carton of Coca-Cola.
Right.
Okay. So there was Spider-Man, the origin of the Fantastic Four, and the origin of the Hulk as a 3-poster series.
Yeah, I have it. Yeah.
You have that?
Yeah, I have.
I didn't get to see that. I didn't get to see that Spider-Man poster printed for back until I'd say that was 1980. I didn't see it until 2003.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's right. Your name is at the bottom. They have
My name's at the bottom, with inks by Dave Hunt. And I never got the original artwork back. I think when I spoke to Dave Hunt years later, he says, oh, yeah, they gave it to me. And I said, why did they give it to you? I penciled it. He goes, I didn't ask questions. They gave me the art. And, I said, do you still have it? He goes, oh, no, I sold it a long time ago. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, of course. But at any rate, I did that poster. And then I also did, at one point, Marvel was going to be doing inserts in the Daily News on Sunday with these little 10-page comics. And so I think they were successful in doing like 2, or I don't know if they were consecutive weeks or if they had one a month. But at any rate, I got to draw a 10-page story of Spider-Man and the Hulk in this particular 10-page story. And Paste Pot Pete was also a villain in it.
Yeah, I know those. They were in the paper, right?
Right.
There's a few of them. I have all of those. Those.
Okay, yeah, but mine, from what I understand, mine never saw print. Okay, so unless you saw one that it says art by Alex Saviuk, and on the first page there's a picture of Spider-Man trying on a hat for Aunt May.
Well,
that was my story. Okay, so at any rate, I did that, and then in the ensuing weeks or whatever, John was still working on the Spider-Man newspaper strip on the Sundays at least. And he called me up and asked me if I would want to help him lay out some Sunday pages, which would really, help, with his time. And he says, just do layouts off the script. And he says, I'll make whatever changes I need, but you'd help me a lot by breaking this down. So I ended up doing at least 4, if not 5 of those. Wow. And they are collected in I think the second volume of the IDW reprints.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I actually have that book. And when I got it, I said, oh man, I showed my wife. I said, look, you probably don't remember, but these 4 Sundays in a row are the ones that I did layouts for John.
Wow.
And as a matter of fact, I did them on the heavy tracing paper called vellum, right?
Yep.
And in those days, the Sundays were really large. I had to take 2 pieces of vellum and tape them together, so it's 1.5 times the size of it, and lay it out that way. Then give it to John, and I think the Sunday pages were penciled that large. And he would always give me back the layouts. So I still have those layouts that I did for him from 1980. To see that stuff in print then with some of the adjustments that he made and whatever was just so cool. I didn't get credits, of course, but I'm letting the cat out of the bag even as we speak.
Yeah, but Alex, how cool, years later, you start doing the dailies of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
The Sundays, actually, to start. Yeah, I know.
When did you start? So when did you how did you get that gig? Because Larry Lieber was doing the art first, right?
Larry Lieber was already doing the dailies. He wasn't doing the Sundays. Let's see. There were a number of guys doing the Sundays. The last one I remember in the 90s was, I think, Paul Ryan was doing it for a while. But then he gave that gig up because he started getting work at DC. So then Stan got, and this old-timer, or veteran, I should say, Fred Kita, to do the Sundays. And Fred said, oh yeah, if I just have to, give you a hand there for a couple of weeks, no problem. Well, the couple of weeks ended up being at least 1.5 to 2 years. And finally, this is 1997. And Fred said, listen, I'm retired. I don't want to be doing this every week. So, I'm giving it up. Oh. And so as it happened, let's see, I got a call from an editor who's, for some reason, Ralph Macchio at Marvel Comics, calls me up and says, hey, listen, how would you like to draw the Spider-Man Sundays with Stan Lee? And I said, yeah, that sounds great. Now, mind you, this is 1997. And at the end of 1996, my contract with Marvel was over. The books I was working on, the Spider-Man animated adventures, whatever, that got canceled. Yes. And nobody was giving me work. I tried to go to DC. Nobody was giving me work. And so I was, doing up samples, getting them ready for advertising purposes again, getting some local advertisers to help me out with storyboard work, etc. And then I got this call to do the Sundays. So I spoke to Stan's assistant, Michael Kelly, and he says, yeah, just, put a packet together so Stan can see some of your work. So I, put Web of Spider-Man in there, of course, Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man Adventures, and sent off the 3 comics. And then I get a call from Michael Kelly, and he goes, Stan really likes the work, but he'd like to see how you would handle a horizontal 6-panel sequence of a Sunday. I said, really? I have to draw a pencil sample? Stan can't tell how I can handle this? He goes, well, it's a different format. He wants to see how you do in a horizontal Sunday format. Because, in the comics, as you know, you can have vertical panels, horizontals. The Sundays are pretty straightforward. It's a 6-panel grid, okay? Like the old timers used to be. And so they didn't send me a script. I had to make something up. So I made up this 6-panel sequence of, Spider-Man swinging in on the first panel, and he's following J. Jonah Jameson, and he gets held up. JJJ gets held up by a couple of thugs, and then the webs come down from up above, and they grab the thugs, and he wraps them up on a fence post, and meanwhile JJ is shaking in his boots until Spider-Man swings away, and then JJ is giving him one of these, right? So I mailed it in to Stan, and I think I must have mailed in a Xerox because I still have that page here in my studio, in my art bins. And so at any rate, about a week later, in the old days of having an answering machine where you push the button and they had the little cassette in there. This is 1997, mind you. Yeah. And so there's a voicemail. And so I click it, and there's Stan Lee, and he goes, hey, Alex. I love your work. I'd love to work on the Sundays with you. As a matter of fact, I just got to tell you, though, it doesn't pay much, but think of the glory. And I'm thinking, wow. So,
think of the glory.
Think of the glory of working on Spider-Man and, of course, ... working with Stan Lee. All right.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Now, however, when he said it didn't pay too much, I'm thinking, gosh, well, what could it pay? But what the hell? It's 1 page a week. I'm working with Stan Lee. How bad could it be? So when I spoke to his assistant, it ended up being the page rate that I got when I left Marvel. So it was just like, okay, I'm getting paid for a page of pencils. And that rate never changed for the 22 years that we worked on Spider-Man together. But whereas some guys, they would like Michael, I'd say occasionally I'd call up his, did you have Niall, did you have some kind of a sign here?
Yeah, it's just me saying hi to people.
Oh, I thought that meant we have 30 seconds left and I got to cut it short. Okay.
Alex, just think of the glory.
Yeah, I know. So at any rate, so I started doing the Sundays with my advertising work, 1 page a week. That was 1997. And from what I found out was that Stan was still writing it from 1997 through half of 98. And then in 98, Jim Salicrup started ghostwriting it for him until 2000. And then Jim gave it up because he said he was making more work for Stan because Stan was rewriting so much of the story that he felt like he wasn't really giving him a break. So then Roy Thomas came in and took over in the year 2000. Okay. And I guess Roy was able to, obviously with his skill, writers can do that just like artists can do that. Writers can look at the way writers write and they go, oh, yeah, I can write the way he writes. And, Roy had that down probably a lot better than Jim did. And so Stan had very little editing to do on Roy's scripts, okay?
Right. No, yeah, that's true. He gave
and actually, when I first got the scripts in 1997 for that first Sunday, I'm looking at him going, this is a script by Stan Lee? Stan Lee never wrote scripts. He only wrote plots, because we used to do that Marvel plot style at the comic book company. So he's actually writing a script. He doesn't give me like an idea and I break it down into 6 panels, but maybe because it was just so restrictive that all those points had to get hit in those 6 panels. But at any rate, I never asked any questions. But, so then in 2000, and Larry Lieber had been already drawing the dailies since I think maybe the late 80s or even early 90s. And he was struggling just getting those 6 days a week out. I don't think he could have done a Sunday on top of what he was doing. And so, and there was another veteran, John Tartaglione, inking the dailies. And in 2003, in February, Michael Kelly, the assistant, called me up and said, hey, listen, John Tartaglione has to go into the hospital for some sort of a procedure. Would you be interested in inking a week of dailies? We already had Terry Austin ink a week, and he can't do a second week. Could you do a week? And there was almost panic in Michael's voice. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. So they sent me the lettered dailies. And I think, I don't remember, I think Kenny Lopez might have been doing the lettering in those days on the dailies, if I'm not mistaken. And so, somehow when you got the pages, the 3 panels per strip, and it was, the borders were already ruled out and the dialogue was in there. Now what's left is for me to ink. I'm going, wow, it's like halfway done. It just felt odd that, wow, all this stuff is around me that looks so professional. Now I just have to go in there and finish doing the inks. And I had a blast doing it, and I let them know that I did. And I just said, hey, listen, if John ever needs a break or he wants to take a vacation, want me to fill in, I'd be more than happy. And that was February, as I said, of 2003. And then unfortunately in November of 2003, I found out that the procedure that John had done was for, I think, throat cancer. And it didn't work. And so he had passed away in November of 2003. And subsequently they asked me, well, would you be interested in inking the dailies as well as penciling the Sundays? To which I gave them a resounding, of course. Now basically between inking the dailies and penciling the Sundays, that paid for my mortgage, my water, and my electric bill. And the rest of the week was gravy. Okay. So I always
think of the glory, Alex. Think of the glory.
And I thought of the glory. Yes, the glory of paying my mortgage on time every month. That's the glory. That's the glory part. And then let's see, push forward to 2018 in June, and Michael Kelly calls me up and says, hey, listen, Larry Lieber wants to retire. He wants to finally finish his novel. And would you be interested in penciling the strip also? And I said, Michael, I've been waiting for this call for 7 years. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, Larry's 87. Somehow I thought that by the time he hits 80, he'd want to retire and write his novel. And I could have been drawing it all on, but no. Unfortunately, you know, I mean, put it this way. Larry's a great guy. I've had some conversations with him. And unfortunately, you know, his wife had passed away. I think he had a second lady in his life. She passed away. He had a couple of pets. They passed away. And he was just kind of left in his apartment there holding the bag and with nothing to do. And, you know, rather a shy personality, unless, you know, if you wanted him to go to a convention, you got to go there and pull him out there and pick him up. And I met him once in San Diego. And all of a sudden, Michael Kelly comes and he brings him over. And there he is. And he's standing there. And he's this, you know, this little old man, unfortunately, when I say that, in stature, because he's a little hunched over. And he goes, wow. And he's looking at my work. And he goes, wow, this is really great. How long does it take you to do something like that? He goes, I said, before I could answer, he goes, I probably need a whole week to do that. I said, nah, it doesn't take me a week, Larry, but, you know, I get the job done, whatever. And he goes, I said, so you're still kicking it. You're still working on the strip, right? This is 2003 when I had inked a week of his already. And this was San Diego. This was July of 03. Or maybe it was 04. I can't remember. Somewhere around there. And he just said, yeah, you know, he says, I really don't have much else to do except work on the strip. So at that time, you know, you go back 20 years, he's what, 91 or 2 now?
He's 91.
So he was only in his early 70s. So, yeah, I mean, he wants to keep working if he's got nothing else to do. Yeah, he was basically my age that I am now. And so, you know, so he was just, like I said, he just seemed like so. You know, he goes, I really wish I didn't have to do the work. That's what he said to me. He goes, I'd like to be sitting around and, you know, have somebody just give me like a good bowl of chicken soup with some matzo balls in it. And, you know, just so I can relax and not have all this deadline pressure on me to get these dailies done. And, you know, I wasn't going to offer to him and say, well, Larry, anytime you don't want to draw them anymore, let me know. I'm here, you know. But so at any rate, I did get the job in June of 2018. And unfortunately, as you know, in November of 18, Stan passed away. And Marvel let us finish the storyline, which ended up, I think March 23rd was the last Sunday. So for 6 months, more or less, I got to pencil and ink the dailies also.
And I love the little one of the last panels that you had. You had you and Roy on the plane with Mary Jane and Peter Parker. That was awesome.
Yeah.
That was great little homage and stuff. But anyways, Alex, we're going to wind down here. And first off, I want to say thank you for coming back on. But just the legendary, just the names in your whole thing. I mean, it's just incredible. Steve, you got any last words for Mr.
You know, this has been just an amazing amount of information that's just gone right into my head like a sponge, just soaking in all these beautiful first-hand accounts. I love these first-hand accounts because it's a living history, and that's what our job here on this show is to, you know, get the information out to a whole new generation, and they can say, oh, by the way, did you see that show with Alex when he revealed this and revealed that and revealed this? And they're like, oh, yeah, I'd heard rumors, but now it was confirmed. So I want to thank you so much. It has been an extraordinarily entertaining and educational show.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me come back on. And somehow it just seems that whenever I get to do these shows, podcasts, or whatever, and people ask me that one question to get me started, as John did. So how did you get into it, Alex? Okay. And so, you know, wow, it just seems like it's never ending. You know, it could kind of, I remember doing an interview like this, and then I said, and now for part 2, I'm going to tell you how I got to do storyboards for movies. But that's another show, you know.
Go ahead, John.
I got to tell you though, man, your stories and the way you tell it and recapture those stories and everything that happened it really is. It's captivating for us listeners. You know, you should start hosting dinners at conventions or something. Have everyone buy a ticket. They get to sit at the table, have dinner with you, and you can just relive these moments.
Well, no promoter has come up to me and said, "Hey, listen, do you want to be involved in one of those meet and greets? Where the fan pays $350 to sit with you. You give them a couple of signatures and you draw them a sketch, and they can ask you questions for 20 minutes." They haven't offered that to me, but man, I'd love to do that. But at any rate,
them links to
yeah.
These,
the thing is that when I first got into the business, gosh, I remember going into the bullpen and then as meeting guys like Frank Giacoia and Gil Kane and Kurt Swan, and talking to Kurt Swan and saying, "So Kurt, how do you like, you're still drawing Superman after all this time, et cetera, et cetera. You like it?" He goes, "Well, to be honest with you, Alex, I'd rather be playing golf." I said, "Oh, okay." He goes, "My wife's a real estate agent, and we, between what I do and what she does, we do really well. And I'd rather just be playing golf." And I thought, wow, that's really cool. Here's a guy that's been drawing Superman for so long, et cetera, et cetera. Oh. And I remember meeting Tex Blaisdell in the bullpen, and Tex was inking backgrounds with his left hand. And I said, "Tex, what are you doing?" He goes, "Well," he says, "I'm getting back into art now." He says, "I'm inking with my left hand because I fell asleep on my drawing table on my right arm about a year ago. And when I woke up in the morning, my right arm was dead." He goes, the arm fell asleep, the nerves got affected, and now it's starting to come back, but he can hold things, but he doesn't have the confidence to be able to draw a line with a pen or a brush. Wow. So he was helping people. He was inking backgrounds and stuff like that, just to make some money for whatever a background guy got paid, because, hey, guys were freelancers in those days. They were I don't think contracts were around in 1977 or 78, right? And I mean, so in those days, yeah, I got to meet Don Heck for the first time. I got to meet Alfredo Alcala, which was kind of a trip, because I asked him, he was telling me all this history about how difficult it is to make a living in the Philippines because they pay so little there. And you have to pencil and ink 3 pages a day in order to make a living. I said, 3 pages a day? I said, "Well, how long is your day?" He goes, "Well, you get started at 9 o'clock in the morning and you finish at 12 o'clock at night. You go to sleep, you wake up, you do it all over again." I said, "Wow, so you can still pencil and ink 3 pages a day?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, but now I make a lot more money." Because he was working in D.C. I go, "So if you're doing three pages of pencils and inks for yourself, how many pages a day do you do when you work on John Buscema's Conan?" He goes, "Oh, that's easy stuff. That's 5 pages a day." 5 pages a day. If you recall when those Savage Tales of Conan came out, with all that etching type of artwork in the rocks and the cliffs and the clouds and even inside the faces, and you're thinking, he does so you figure, wow, 3 hours a page to ink one of those with all that extensive work, because he obviously worked a 15-hour day. So, but he had to take time to eat and, take some breaks and whatever. But man, that's just amazing work, right?
Inking John Buscema's work, you get that. I'm sure there's a little bit of excitement on each day. That's incredible. But Alex,
yeah,
go ahead. No, I was going to say, but it's incredible. You have a great story. Instead of those meet and greets, Alex, we should put you on vaudeville. We get you on vaudeville. You can do all your acts. You can have all the stories. It's great, and you can play the piano too.
As long as I get the striped jacket, the hat, and the cane, the candy cane type cane, so I can dance around and then yank somebody off the stage. Yeah, let's look into that.
Let's go. Well, thank you so much, Alex. You have great stories with just great characters, and seriously, I'll never forget that quote. Just, you're not going to get paid that much, but think of the glory. Okay, that's Steve, right. Get us out of here.
All right, take care, guys. Appreciate it. Nice meeting you, Steve. All right, so long.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP. and over on Instagram at the PopXP. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you soon.